phone on silent.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Arash's World. Today, we have a very special guest. We have Etan Ilfeld, who is, I used to think I was a Renaissance man, but then he beats me in every aspect. Welcome to Arash's World, Etan.
Thank you, Arash. I don't know about beating you as a Renaissance man, but I'll take the compliments. Thank you so much for making time today, and it's a pleasure to be here.
I was wondering if you can introduce yourself, because there's so much that I've read about you, so much that you do. So I'm really curious to see, how would you introduce yourself here briefly to our audience?
Sure. Well, I think all humans to some extent are chameleons, and we often will introduce ourselves in different ways depending on the audience. So I guess a simple way to think about myself is that I'm a publisher. So I run a publishing company and own a bookstore. And it just so happens that both the publishing company and the bookshop are very much attuned to the mind, body, and spirit world. And so that's a big part of what I do. I also have a few other imprints. Imprints are like divisions or departments within the publishing sector, so like a label in the music industry. But so we do some other things. We've got a philosophy imprint and a science fiction imprint, and we even do a little bit of cooking, but some cookbooks. But I'd say 95% of what we focus on is mind, body, and spirit publishing, and that's what the bookshop is all about as well. And I myself, that's a big part of my life. I guess another thing that I like to tell people when they want to know about me, get to know me a bit better, is I'm also a huge geek, and I love playing board games, and that's a really big thing for me. And I even organize a really interesting and weird board game festival called the Mind Sports Olympiad. So there you go. That opens two tangents right there.
Wonderful. Yeah, and I did read about that you've invented diving chess, which sounds fascinating. And before we get to start about mind body, which is really what I'm into, but I like chess, and I've never thought of combining diving with chess. So maybe we could just briefly talk about that.
Sure. Yeah. So like I said, I love games, and chess was I guess one of my early games, and that's something that I'm obsessed with. I love playing chess. I love learning about it, and I do it less these days, but I played competitively when I was younger, and I got the national master title in my teenage years. And I remember hearing people debate for eons whether or not chess is a sport, and I don't have a strong opinion one way or another, but I thought perhaps there is a way to create a chess version that would be undebatable. It would certainly be a sport. And so I came up with this idea of playing chess and substituting the chess clock, which dictates the tempo when you play competitively, with breath work. And so the idea was to put a board at the bottom of a swimming pool and let each player think for as long as they can hold their breath for each move. And that's what we do. It's simple as that. And, it's a very simple concept, and it certainly becomes a sport, and it's a fun thing. That's part of the idea. It's also about having some fun as well.
Exactly, having fun. And that's just wonderful, very creative. And what I want to talk about today is, again, mind body, as you're saying, but also your Synchronicity Oracle, which I have gotten here, and which I tried out on a few occasions, and I'm quite fascinated by it. But and I will share with you a bit later also my experience with tarot cards and a bit of itching and so on. But how would we first describe synchronicity? What is it? What is your definition of synchronicity, as it's called the Synchronicity Oracle, and it's based on that knowledge? So how would you define it, though, to start off?
Sure. So I guess I'm still trying to wrap my head around Carl Jung's concept of synchronicity, because he's the guy who kind of started it all, really. And I recently read, he's got an essay about synchronicity. And I try to understand better what does he mean by it, because there's a lot of ways to interpret that. I mean, to a large extent, it's also about paying attention to when things match. So we have what he calls like things that have independent sources that happen to be in sync, and being aware of that can often make us more attuned to the world, whether or not you have a spiritual inclination, I think it's still really interesting, because even if someone thinks, oh, well, I mean, well, it's just a coincidence, there's no meaning there, I would still say, hey, why don't you tap into your unconscious and subconscious and see what does it bring to the surface? So paying attention, I think that's a really good thing. Jung attributed some real meaning to synchronicity. He really believed that there was some sort of I guess like transcendental influence of sorts, I guess, or correspondence, if not influence, then, and that by paying attention to synchronicity, we can be more aware of the flow of the world. And I think that's really cool. I mean, that's a concept that my mom, who's an astrologer, has instilled upon me. And she's always talking about these interesting synchronicities that happen to her, and she loves sharing them. She loves collecting these stories, and it's something that's a big part of kind of the way she experiences the world. And I've always appreciated that.
I find it very interesting, and that's also the idea of like all your background, all the knowledge that you have, all the insights of the combination of how many different influences go into your oracle that you've created. Because I'm a huge tarot card fan, but it's also like you have astrology. There are images that you usually don't see, like aliens and people with
Yeah.
TV headsets that are jumping around. So I was like really like fascinated by how did you come up with all these influences? There's some very interesting symbols also in terms of going back into history of, again, the glasses, and you give a description how, when they started, how they were created. And how did all this come together for you in this oracle?
Sure, good question. So as you say, it's got quite an eclectic mix of symbols. A lot of I guess perennial symbols, you could say, from the lotus to like Buddha, to parts of the zodiac. There are 57 cards and 57 symbols. 8 symbols appear on each card, because it's when people see them, there's 8 symbols on each card, and actually each symbol appears 8 times on 8 different cards. So anyway, that's a lot of numbers, a lot of math. But the point is, I was able to curate 57 symbols and explore and take things from from antiquity up to modernity, and I looked for interesting symbols, and I wanted it to be accessible. Tarot is great, and I think tarot is awesome. And if you come to our bookshop in London, we have the widest selection of tarot decks, possibly in the world, certainly in the UK. And there's a lot of wonderful tarot decks out there. And there's a lot of other great oracle decks. But what I found interesting about this process was I wanted to create something that's very accessible. In tarot, you've got to study a good amount to be able to understand it. I mean, it's not that simple to intuitively understand what's the difference between the 5 of cups, let's say, and the 6 of cups. And when you're dealing with, I guess, these sort of Jungian archetypes or very strong symbols that I've taken, it's a lot easier to do that. So even though there's a booklet and every symbol comes with keywords and usually positive things, and then there's also a shadow side to every symbol. And there's, as you say, there's a bit of history in there. There's a reflection. There's a meditation for each symbol, which is really fun. But ultimately, you could put the booklet aside and just do a reading and completely go with it intuitively. So it's a deck that's usable immediately, basically, without any need to study. And I like that.
It's also great fun, and I tried it with my son, who's a teen, and he really enjoyed it too. And that's already a good sign of making it accessible, but also fun. And so the fun part for me was when you do it, you look at what is the symbol that matches these two, and you see like commonalities between them. And it must have taken, like, you have a great knowledge in math to put it together in a way that it kind of makes sense. At the same time, it's something that it will match. Again, between 2 cards will match in a symbol. So I found that very just interesting. And talk about the meditation, it was also very interesting. I read through the whole booklet, and how it's like this warm tone and these like ideas, meditation that will really help you kind of get into touch with your intuition. And so I found that quite fascinating. Now, just to talk about my experience with the oracles and so on, was tarot cards. And it started when I was 16. And I had in my high school, and I grew up in Germany, so my French teacher, he gave us a reading in tarot cards. And after that moment, I was hooked. And I remember my first card that I got was a death card. And I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna die. But I said, no, 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 it's not bad. Like they usually say, which was true. But after that, I was so amazed. I said, where did you get this from? And how do you know about this? And he led me towards a guidebook that came with the cards. Hayo Banzaf, a German person. And he, when I read it, I started practicing it myself. I started, like you're saying, experimenting with it. And the more knowledge I gained, the more intimate it got with me. And I just like, basically since then, for decades now, I've been hooked on these tarot cards and other types as well, but really tarot cards. What was your experience of getting it directed in this direction of oracles?
Sure. So yeah, so first of all, that's really cool, and what a great story. And I'm curious, by the way, as to which deck, if you remember, which one was it? Was it the Rider-Waite classic, the best-selling deck, often competing with the Thoth, the Crowley deck. But yeah, those are Rider-Waite certainly leads the pack.
And so I was taking a psychology class, undergrad studies, and I wrote an essay on comparing Jung with tarot cards. And my instructor loved it so much that I had to do a tarot card reading for her, and she was impressed. And so it was also interesting where again with these oracles, it's not like what will happen tomorrow or next year, or will I get this job, but more about yourself in it. What can you do to achieve certain goals? So I like that, because it's not just this is going to happen and there's no way you can escape it. It's more like, well, this is what you can do to achieve this. And we're really involved in our fate. It's not something that just happens to us in many cases. And so I found that very interesting. And so when people don't tell you what the question is, they say, I'd rather not tell you. It's like, okay, I start the reading and it becomes blatantly obvious what the question was about without them having to tell me. And that's a cool thing, because it also looks at the past. So you already have confirmation of this is true. And for me, there's not a single shred of doubt that this is actually true. And I'm fascinated by all of this.
Absolutely. So yeah, tarot is amazing. And as I'm sure you noticed, one of the 57 symbols is the tarot.
Yes, I was very thrilled to see that.
Yeah, and it's I guess that image seems to be primarily of the major arcana, I believe the Rider-Waite, and it's got the world, and as the card that stands out there, which has a lot of meaning to it, from travel to starting, closing a circle, starting a new circle, all these different things. But the major arcana, I mean, it is amazing, and again, lots of Jungian archetypes there, very, very powerful. And tarot is an amazing thing. So I think that yeah, it's a wonderful thing. And we as publishers, we publish actually a good amount of different types of tarot decks and oracle decks. So I've had an opportunity to help a lot of creative individuals bring out some interesting decks out there. And so I guess that gave me that every now and then that would kind of pump my curiosity a bit. And as for the mechanism, I have to give credit. There's a French mathematician in the 70s who came up with the mechanism for making sure that the pairs always match up, and that's been used in a children's game that I play with my daughter sometimes. So I borrowed that mechanism and thought, hey, let's bring it into an oracle deck. And then I came up with the idea of making the cards hexagonal, which, as you probably noticed, they can actually cover a surface by connecting together. So they can tessellate or create a wallpaper, basically. So it's quite it's quite fun to play around and find new ways to do things. And the symbols, I mean, going back to the symbols, you do have an alien, a green alien on there, which can symbolize the outsider, feeling alienated, all these different things. But I found it really interesting to try and draw upon contemporary symbols with ancient symbols, and that's part of the fun for me, is allowing oneself to, I guess, kind of break boundaries and allow yourself to just
And to
be
explore, I mean,
creative.
to not be limited by this is how it's done, and we have to continue in this way, because then creativity would be stifled. And one of the things with all of this is I feel like intuition is very important for us in our lives. But so many times in our lives we're not using that knowledge that is accessible to us. So that's why I think we do need oracles. Do you agree with that? That what is the function of oracles, and like for you personally, how would you define it?
Absolutely. So
Yeah.
I think it's about, I like this term, the creative unconscious as well. I talk about, collective, I mean, Jung has the collective unconscious and all these other things, but, we all have a creative unconscious side to us, and tapping into that, it's a very powerful thing. I mean, even if you do something really simple, let's say where you might decide, oh, you're not sure between two decisions and you're going to just flip a coin. And as soon as that coin lands, you might say, oh, no, I really didn't want that. Then that experience actually allowed you to tap into yourself and realize and become more aware as to what it is you really want. And awareness is really, that's the name of the game. And that's what it is for spirituality, for enlightenment, for everything, right? Being aware is key.
And how can we tap into it? Because my experience is once I experience it, I'm mindful of it, it grows. And I find that I'm in sync with basically the life force or universe and everything. But how would you say can people tap into that, or find a way of tapping into that unconscious, that creative unconscious, as you're saying?
Yeah, well, I think, it's very interesting because, as you say, once you're able to tap into it, sometimes you'll notice these sequences of synchronicity, or just a series of green lights in one's life. And, that's a wonderful thing. And being able to unlock that, that's a very, very powerful thing. And, in life, you're always going to have ups and downs, right? I mean, that's the nature of the beast. But if you can find ways to try and, maximize those ups, and, that's always a good thing. I mean, this is perhaps I'm going a little bit on a tangent here, but Jungian psychologists really believe that in the first 45 minutes when you wake up, that's when you're most, connected to your unconscious. And so, if in Julia Cameron's The Artist's Way, and which I think is a tremendous book to tap into one's creativity, she recommends doing morning pages where every morning you just do this stream of consciousness writing, and you do it as soon as you wake up. So before your ego fully forms, and and that's a great time to kind of tap into yourself. And I think that's powerful. And I think that oracle decks can serve a similar purpose throughout the day. I think meditating can do that as well. There are many paths, right? But the point is that we need to allow ourselves to connect to our inner selves.
And we don't do it enough. And many times we just see things logically, or like, we try to use the left side, the left brain too much, and we don't see the full picture, or a lot of important information that is hidden from us because we choose not to look at it, or not to develop it. And it's an interesting coincidence, because when you mentioned green light, for me, the movie Green Ray by Eric Romer really changed many things for me in terms of synchronicity and coincidences. Because in the movie, there's this young woman who finds cards in the streets. So I was fascinated by that, because the cards would give her important information and guidance. And I thought, what if that would happen to me? Because the playing cards are related to tarot cards, so I can kind of interpret them and understand them. And ever since then, I found so many cards on the street that have guided me, which is fascinating. In the movie, she would never take them with her, but I did. But what was the culminating point? I mean, finding like random cards anywhere in the world, in Germany and Mexico and so on, at important moments of my life. Even when I met my wife, then it was like a really like good cards. It's like getting the big fish, like landing the 9 of diamonds. I was like, okay, that's a good sign, and it was true. But the shocker for me was finding the world card, tarot card on the streets, and it was actually a French version, Le Monde. And it's just like, that can't be a coincidence. And I'm kind of afraid of telling people this, because it seems like, it doesn't make sense. But I do physically have these cards, and I do collect them and say, look, I found that. I found it with people too. And once I tell them this story, they find cards as well,
It's
which I
amazing.
find equally fascinating. So if you run into a card, then it's because you kind of invited that kind of vibe into your world, which is, I have no words for this. Maybe you do. I don't really
No,
understand it.
I love that, and I think you totally understand it. I think you're in tune, and it shows that you're aware. So I love that story, and as you say, normal cards are very much related to tarot cards. I mean, at the end of the day, a normal playing deck doesn't have the major arcana, but other than that, they're the same except for the page, right? It's the minor is 56 cards because there's that extra royal character, but other than that, you've got 4 suits, and everything else is pretty much exactly the same. And yeah, so that, I mean, that's very, very interesting. And by the way, just a bit of random trivia, because I think this is quite cool, and I love trying to understand symbols, and how they're, and being more aware of culture, and how it's been shaped through history, right? So I think a very interesting thing about playing cards is, we all know, right, that what's the highest card in a normal suit? What is it?
The ace, or
Yes, yes. And what's interesting is that wasn't always historically the case.
oh,
Uh, traditionally, it used to be that the king was the highest.
yeah,
And do you know what happened?
no, I don't know.
It's quite amazing. Basically, around the French Revolution, they decided that they wanted the peasant, the lowest, the one, to be above the royals, and that's when the ace began to dominate. And to this day, that's how people play. So, I mean, I think it's amazing. A lot of people aren't aware of that, but like, there's so much history within our symbols and our systems, and that is just a great example of that, right? Which I find fascinating, basically.
Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating. And I'm wondering why, and the church is strongly against any kind of cards or anything that resembles gambling. And I found interesting, I watched this movie last night, Oscar and Lucinda. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's
Sounds
about
familiar.
a priest who is addicted to gambling.
Oh
And
yeah, I
so
did see it. I did see it.
yeah,
Is that the one where he goes? He's in Australia or something?
yes, that's right. Yeah,
Oh my
yeah.
gosh, yeah,
And
yeah.
so what I found
Good
interesting,
film.
yeah, it's a great film. What I found interesting is there's this line he says about Pascal and the wager, and he says, "Well, God wants us to gamble." He says it's okay to gamble our life on it, and so why is it frowned upon? And it made me think. I mean, that's our life is a gamble when we assume that spirituality, coincidence, universe, God, and all of that exists because you are wagering your soul on it. So why is this frowned upon? Is my question in religion. No.
It's true. I mean, that's an interesting interpretation of, obviously, Pascal's wager, right? If obviously, if not everybody knows, Pascal's wager is the idea that Pascal, the philosopher and mathematician, said you should believe in God, because if you're right, that's great. Because but if you don't, that's a bad gamble. You're going to go straight to hell. But yeah, it's very interesting that this idea of gambling as part of spirituality. That's a complicated thing. I mean, because obviously gambling is, is much more complicated than just reading oracles, right? And I think, yeah, I mean, because in that movie, he was literally addicted to gambling, right? Like, he wanted to risk it all, basically.
But he used it for good because he would give it away
Yes,
for charity, which is like
that's
there's
right.
no personal motive, no sin there technically, according to him, which I found interesting too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And um, it's true. Religion usually tries to look down upon it. I don't have a strong stance about gambling per se. I think, all things in moderation, I would say, in life. But as for the church frowning upon, oracle systems, yeah, anything that
But
the
oracles
church has tried to control.
are part of the
Right?
Bible. There's all these dreams and there's messages,
Yeah,
there's angels appearing.
absolutely.
To me, that's an
Well,
oracle. To me,
I
that's the
agree.
definition of oracle. And
But
so
yeah,
I
Joseph, and right, giving,
yes.
yeah, the Pharaoh, like, interpreting his dreams. Absolutely, you're right.
And I think these are the symbols that if we train ourselves with our intuition, we will be able to see these things. And Carlos Castaneda talks about that, these kind of like coincidences that happen that have a message. So for me, it's the cards, but it could be anything. It could be just this particular sound. It could be I'm reading something and I hear a song and they say they match and it's a specific message and so on. And it sounds like insanity, but then I would say, no, it's not, because there is more than we can see with our eyes. There's more than we can perceive. And my concern with science is they try to limit that part. And it's just, we're focusing on things that we can really observe, but there is so much that we can't see. The unconscious for me was a great discovery to really accept it. And that was also a card I found, which said, you know what, all your fears are based from when you were a child. And it was 6 of clubs I found. And after that, I went weird towards psychoanalysis, which changed everything for me. But
Wow.
it's like so many of us, and I was hesitant. I was like, well, the unconscious, come on. But you dive into it and you say, this is true, but science still frowns upon it in many cases, or does not give Jung and Freud the recognition they deserve, the standing they deserve, and how they can really help us connect the mind with the body. It's we have a very dualistic view of these things, I find.
Absolutely. And yeah, I think that's totally true. I mean, Freud, to a large extent, is very much disrespected these days, even though he made tremendous progress, um, and he was a complicated figure that obviously didn't get everything right. Right, that's often the nature of
Nobody really
trailblazers.
does, yeah. Yeah, but it's that kind of like blocking things, because science cannot prove it, therefore it doesn't exist, or whether it's like an afterlife, or whether it's a spirit or intuition, or these coincidences that it's seen as random. I don't think so. I mean, there is so much more to our lives and to what we can see. And even the discussion of aliens is something that I guess 10 years ago, people would have laughed at you. And now scientists are talking about it openly. And I'm thinking, what just happened? All these years you've been telling us people are kooky and so on. And now we're saying, yeah, well, it's quite possible. Let's look at this. And I just I find it fascinating at the same time as it's bizarre in many ways.
Absolutely. I think there's the Drake equation that tries to calculate the probability of extraterrestrial life, which has been around. But yeah, it's true. It's fascinating to see. I mean, science plays it safe, right? That is the nature of science, and every now and then something will upend it, right, and and cause it to change, and it will just appropriate it and play it safe again. That's how it is. And some things, are, as you say, afterlife and all these other things are very difficult for science to deal with. Even though there are certain people that try and attempt ways to tackle these things. And going back to reading Carl Jung's essay on synchronicity, he does have some science in there and some statistics. So he actually, he seemed to believe there was a path through I guess, like, I don't know, normal science, I guess you can call it, to try and bridge that gap. But obviously there seems to be a very large gap these days.
And you have somebody like Einstein who says, imagination is so important to us. And for him, it's like it was imagination that was what he was striving for, and it's not just the pure science or knowledge that we have. And you have written a book, or co-written a book about Einstein.
Right.
And yeah, can you tell us a bit about that? I found that very interesting.
Sure. So I have several interests, and I actually studied math and physics. That's what I double majored in for my undergrad in the States. And I think Einstein obviously was an absolute genius, a sort of once in a generation kind of person. And I loved reading Walter Isaacson's biography about him. So I do recommend that book if anyone wants to delve more into Einstein. And I thought, it would be interesting to juxtapose this book with one of the greatest artists of the 20th century, Marcel Duchamp. And so that's why I created this novelette with Chris Hines called Duchamp versus Einstein. And they get to interact and actually play a game of chess. And it's a fun book, but again, this was a way for me to play with different ideas. And and Einstein, he's also just this amazing person. A lot of people don't realize that he actually, even though he was born German, he renounced his citizenship and later in life, he became a German citizen again.
Oh, I did not know that. That part I didn't know. Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
that's quite unique. And then he renounced it a second time. So it's like an interesting part of trivia. So before he fled during, when the Nazis were growing in strength in the 30s, when he fled to the States, he renounced his German citizenship a second time. That's quite unique. Not many people
do it
get
twice.
to do twice, to the same citizenship, to give it up twice.
Yeah.
That's quite something. And he lived in a very tumultuous period in history, and played with a lot of really amazing ideas that have shaped the modern world today. Everything, even this call we're having right now through Zoom. I mean, it's using special relativity and all these different things. You have to actually make little adjustments. Even satellites, they have to make minor adjustments to account for special relativity just to make sure that things are in sync, which is just
Oh my God.
amazing.
Okay.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. And you talk
it's,
about God doesn't play dice with the universe, right? That's a correct quote or something like that.
I
So in
believe
terms of
so.
coincidences, yeah.
I
Yeah.
think so. Yeah, there's a lot of quotes that are misattributed, but I believe that is a correct quote. Although it's kind of open to interpretation. What does that mean? I don't know.
Okay.
What does it mean to you? I mean, does that mean? I mean, to some extent, it's complicated, but I guess he kind of thought that things were more deterministic than I guess quantum mechanics seems to indicate that they are. When quantum mechanics, which he is largely responsible for, I guess, developing, it shows us that there is a certain amount of, I guess, indeterminability. Like, not only can you not determine certain things, but also the idea that the future is a little bit open as well. Like, there are these sorts of, I guess, it's hard to describe, but these multiple possibilities that are superimposed, and Einstein didn't like that much. So perhaps the quote, God didn't play with dice, it goes back to that a bit. He didn't like the idea that things were, I guess, completely, could be probabilistic to some extent, but apparently that seems to be the way the world works to some extent. There is a sort of I guess, undeterminable future, and for those of us who want to take a spiritual slant on it, there's nothing scientifically speaking to disprove the idea that there might be something transcendental that every now and then could intervene within those probabilities, because if that were to happen, it wouldn't violate the laws of quantum mechanics. You could still have, overall things would still appear and function based on the laws of quantum mechanics. Sorry, this is getting super geeky, so perhaps we should go back. But the point is, the future is open. We can create it.
Yeah, I think quantum mechanics, I don't understand it, but I'm fascinated by it because what it does, it like punctures like holes into the armor of science, of this certainty, we know everything. And this is this, it's P or not P. And then where you get situations where like, yeah, it could be this, but it could also be that. The cat is alive, the cat is dead. And all these like thoughts and ideas that are kind of thrown onto science, this like uncertainty, this doubt. I welcome it because it's like, you don't know everything and we don't know everything. And that I think creates a humility. It's like, okay, I have to accept other points of views. I have to be open to it. And kind of like Pascal's wager, it's like, okay, well, if I wager, put my money on this God, what if there's another one? And just kind of not being limited in our point of view of thinking we know everything. That certainty, and we probably will never reach that point, and that's for the better in many cases.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that 100%. And and it's interesting that Einstein was actually uncomfortable, as I mentioned, with this notion that that we may not. His whole life was oriented towards figuring everything out. A general theory of relativity, he figured that out, and then some sort of general theory of all the forces, a unified field theory, which he wasn't able to do. So yeah, I mean, it's fascinating, and I think it's good to have some humility and also to be open to, I guess, an uncertain future.
Mhm. Now, yeah, mind and body, they are they are connected. That, I think, the idea of trying to separate one from the other is just creating a lot of confusion and also pain, suffering, and probably also diseases, because there are psychosomatic disorders that show us that the two are often linked, and even with like other physical diseases. And so there is a move towards a more holistic view of seeing people, of seeing patients, and so on, which I applaud, which I strongly support. And so, what else do we need to do to get to that point of, like, accepting that these two are not separate from each other, to kind of embrace them into a yin and yang, perhaps, of like the function within each other, with each other. They're not separate like Descartes likes us to think.
Absolutely. And by the way, the yin and yang symbol is one of the symbols in the 57
Yeah.
symbols, as I'm sure you noticed. And as it points out, all opposites contain their opposites within them, right? The white side has a black dot in it. And, that is the nature of reality. And we also, as complex beings that are constantly in a process of change, we need to be aware of the fact that all sides of us contain our other sides as well. And certainly the mind and body are intertwined. There's no doubt about that. And the power of each to affect the other is tremendous, whether it's the gut through, taking care of your microbiome, which can actually affect your mental health tremendously.
Absolutely. Now they're finding out, yes.
To, making sure that you're taking good care of your mind and your brain, and also even if how you see yourself, your identity, like that has a tremendous effect on how you interact with the world. And the green lights that come ahead of you, the how your immune system reacts in different circumstances. I mean, these are very powerful things. And even if you were to, I don't know, have some sort of ritual that might have some sort of placebo, let's say, people sometimes laugh at the gullibility, I guess, of people that have I don't know, have some sort of placebo effect. But actually, no, it's quite the opposite. I would say a placebo, if there's something that's doing something good for you, that it in itself it's not clear why it's working, I'd say that's powerful. More power to you.
Yeah, and that does the same thing to the science that we have, like this medication, and then you have a placebo. And I've had non-alcoholic beer, and sometimes I feel as drunk as I would with beer, and say, how is that possible? Because there must be an error here. But you have people who are cured without having to take medication, but they believe they're taking medication, which I find fascinating. And it shows you the power of the mind over the body, or the connection between the two, at least.
Absolutely.
And your book ends, your last symbol is a 0, right?
That's right.
Let's explain that. I found that fascinating too. And I think it really fits in with all these things that I'm talking about here.
So let me actually share an interesting, I guess, coincidence or synchronicity, sure, which I found quite funny, in that the book actually has the booklet that you just mentioned has a printing error. There's only one that I'm aware of. And I missed it. And it's actually on that last symbol where actually the 0 isn't illustrated, and that's an accident.
That is true. That is true.
And that was a mistake. But actually, I thought, you know what? If something isn't going to be illustrated, what's more appropriate than 0? 0 is nothing. And so the fact that the symbol for 0 is missing within the booklet, not in the cards, just to be clear for everybody watching and listening, I think that's beautiful. What a tremendous coincidence. Yes, in the second print run, we'll fix that for sure.
Or don't. I actually keep it that
I know, maybe not, because that's special. But no, I think that makes the first print run, the first edition, let's say, more special to some extent. And I love it. I love that it came out that way. So what an amazing coincidence. And 0 is a very powerful concept. Obviously, even going back to quantum mechanics, there's this idea that within 0 you've got everything. There's so much potential. Even then in the vacuum of space, there's this idea in physics of vacuum energy. Even there's something. In nothing, there's always something. And and that's a very, very powerful thing. And Yeah, and it's a coincidence that actually, well, that alphabetically in the English language, it's the Z, so it's at the end. Um, but it's funny because we just sold the French rights, so there will be a French edition coming out in the next 18 months or so, and we'll see. They'll decide where to put things, and I guess zero is probably the same there. But the point is, other words may have different orders, and when we get to other languages, it might be completely different. But yeah, in English, it was quite nice to see how zero also happened to be the last symbol, and yeah, started with the last letter of the alphabet.
Yeah, it's again a wonderful oracle, and I think it's just great to have all these new things thrown into it, but again build on previous knowledge as well, and these symbols. And I think the more you do it, the more familiar you get with these symbols, and the more you personalize it and customize it to your own self and your own way of seeing. Would you agree with that? So it's kind of also fluid. It's not something that is necessarily fixed.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think that's part of the beauty of life, and is nothing should be stagnant. So yes, absolutely, it changes, it grows on you, and I think there are some symbols that are even more open to interpretation than others. So you mentioned earlier, people need to see the symbol, I guess, in the deck, but there's a sort of jumping TVs symbol, which is very weird. And I just thought it was cool when I was looking at different symbols. I thought, wow, I have to include that, but I'm not even sure exactly what that symbol means. I wrote an interpretation to it, but it's just a weird symbol that could mean, I guess, brainwashing or propaganda, disinformation, and tribalism, all these other things. But it's also just a really weird, interesting symbol.
So this is the jumping TVs, and I used it for when my son is like, you need to watch out in your screen time. And my interpretation of it, of like,
I agree.
Giving him a message there. And so it's a wonderful oracle. I highly recommend it. And it is, again, it's a bit of everything. This is what I find, like, it's a buffet, and it's like you get a bit of everything in it. So I highly recommend it. I thank you for coming and talking about it. It just like thank you so much for being here, for talking about it, Etan. And again, I highly recommend this oracle to everyone.
Thank you, Arash. It's been a real pleasure, and you brought a lot of wisdom to the conversation. I need to watch Green Lights, I think you said was the
Green Ray. The Green Ray.
Green Ray. Sorry, Green Ray. That's the one where they find where she finds all these cards.
Yeah,
so
and
that's going on my watch.
And then
list.
after that, you will find cards. So let me know what you found. I'd be just curious to see.
Cool. Awesome.
Thank you so much for being in Arash's world. Best of luck to you. Take care.
Thank you. All the best to you. Thanks.